midday prime. For the next 1 hour, we'll bring you all the stories and updates from India and the world. We will update you about the happenings in the world of business and sports, and we'll get you some interesting stories that are making headlines. Our top focus today is China placing a technical hold on the listing of deputy head of Pakistan-based Jaish-e-Mohammed Abdul Rauf Azhar as a global terrorist at the UNSC. China has been doing this repeatedly at the UN. We will tell you how and analyze what it means. Also on the show, blame game continues between Russia and Ukraine over the shelling near the spent fuel storage facility of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, even as India expresses concern over the shelling in a statement at the UNSC. That and more news from around the world and within India on Midday Prime. But first up, the big news at this hour. India describes China's blocking of UNSC sanctions against Abdul Rauf Azhar as a politically motivated move that exposes China's doublespeak and double standards when it comes to the international community's shared battle against terrorism. Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of shelling Europe's biggest nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhia. UN Chief Antonio Guterres proposes a demilitarized zone at the site, while IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi hints at the grave consequences of such military operations. India expresses concern and calls for mutual restraint. Latvia and Estonia withdraw from cooperation group between China and over a dozen Central and Eastern European countries. Follows footsteps of Baltic neighbour Lithuania, which withdrew last year. Move comes amid Western criticism towards China over escalating military pressure on Taiwan and Beijing's ties with Russia during the invasion of Ukraine. European nations send firefighting teams to help France tackle a monster wildfire, while forest blazes also raged in Spain and Portugal. The head of the European Space Agency urges immediate action to combat climate change. The largest annual celebration of Indian cinema outside of India, the Indian Film Festival of Melbourne, begins from today. It is screening over 100 films from a range of genres and themes. International Youth Day 2022 is being celebrated today across the world with the theme Intergenerational Solidarity, creating a world for all ages, bringing youth issues to the attention of the international community. International Youth Day celebrates the potential of youth as partners in today's global society. And in sports, Rahul receives green signal from BCCI's medical team to head the Indian team in the forthcoming 3 ODI tour of Zimbabwe. Shikhar Dhawan made the vice captain for the series. FIFA officially brings forward the opening match of this year's World Cup by 1 day to the 20th of November in a rare schedule change, allows the host nation Qatar to play after the opening ceremony. Let's get started with the big news. For the second time in 2 months, China has sought to delay sanctioning of terrorists operating from Pakistan. In the latest move, China has blocked a proposal by India and the United States at the UN Security Council to designate Abdul Rauf Azhar, brother of Jaish-e-Mohammed Chief Masood Azhar and deputy chief of the Pakistan-based prescribed terror group, as a global terrorist. All other 14 member states of UNSC were supportive of the listing proposal. China had done the same with LET terrorist Abdul Rahman Makki in June. Indian government sources say there is incontrovertible evidence for both these listing proposals and have taken exception to politically motivated actions by China in nearly every listing case of a Pakistan-based terrorist. Here are the details.
China has blocked a proposal by India and the US at the United Nations Security Council to designate Abdul Rauf Azhar, brother of Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Maulana Masood Azhar and deputy chief of the Pakistan-based proscribed terror group, as a global terrorist. Azhar, referred to as Abdul Rauf Asghar in UN documents, was involved in the planning and execution of several terror attacks, including the hijacking of Indian Airlines flight IC-814 in 1999, attack on Parliament in 2001, an attack on the Indian Air Force base in Pathankot in 2016. Earlier, hitting out at China for putting a hold on the UN listing of Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba's second-in-command, Abdul Rahman Makki, India's ambassador to the UN, Ruchira Kamboj, said it is regrettable that genuine and evidence-based listing proposals pertaining to some of the most notorious terrorists in the world are being placed on hold.
It is most regrettable that genuine and evidence-based listing proposals pertaining to some of the most notorious terrorists in the world are being placed on hold. Double standards and continuing politicization have rendered the credibility of the sanctions regime at an all-time low. We do hope that all members of the Council can pronounce together in one voice sooner rather than later when it comes to this collective fight against international terrorism.
She also said we should refrain from describing terrorism on any motivation, as it will give opportunity to opportunists to justify terrorist activities. At a UNSC briefing on the topic, threats to international peace and security caused by terrorist attacks, India mentioned about state hospitality for terrorists in a neighbouring country despite being listed under the UNSC 1267 Sanctions Committee.
In India, we've had first-hand experience of crime syndicates venturing into terrorism and immediately thereafter getting state hospitality in a neighbouring country, despite being listed under the Council 1267 sanction committees. Such hypocrisy needs to be collectively called out when the threat of terrorism looms large in each of our countries.
She said India has suffered from the menace of terrorism for decades and has learned to counter this threat with resolve and firm determination. She hoped that the international community will stand united in addressing this threat to humanity with zero tolerance. Bureau Report, DD India.
Let's now take a look at how China has repeatedly been coming to the defense of terrorists at the United Nations Security Council. This is what has happened. In this very month, China blocked proposal by India and the United States at the UNSC to designate JEM chief Masood Azhar's brother Rauf as a global terrorist. So this is the latest in what China has been doing over the past several years. Abdul Rauf Azhar is deputy chief of Pakistan-based Jaish-e-Mohammed. So these three terrorists are those that have been protected by China in some form or the other at the UNSC, especially by putting technical holds on their listing as global terrorists. China has placed technical hold on Azhar's listing in 1267 Sanctions Committee. What else do we know about China coming to the defense of these terrorists? In June 2022, Beijing had blocked a proposal to designate deputy chief of the LET, Abdul Rahman Makki, as a global terrorist. And this is happening for the second time, at least, against a JEM terrorist. This has happened against the LET in the past. Both are involved in terror attacks in India, including 26/11 attack on the Indian Parliament, as well as hijacking of IC-814. So both Makki as well as Rauf have been involved in these attacks. What else do we know about the terrorists in question? Well, Makki also has been involved in raising funds, recruiting and radicalizing youths to resort to violence. So Abdul Rahman Makki has been accused of all these charges. So there are a number of serious charges against these terrorists, and they are also sanctioned by the United States under their domestic legislation. So both have been sanctioned by the US under its domestic legislation. Also, China had on several occasions blocked the listing of Masood Azhar too as a global terrorist before relenting in 2019 under international pressure. So for several years, China had raised a red flag on the listing as a global terrorist of Masood Azhar, the head of JEM, primarily responsible for the attack on Indian Parliament in 2001, and it was only after a lot of international pressure was put on China that it relented in 2019. So the question is, will the international community really need to come together this time around too in order to ensure that other global terrorists are also listed? Listing as a global terrorist leads to assets freeze, travel ban and arms embargo. So these are the things that happen after the listing of a global terrorist. So these are the consequences of listing for a global terrorist. The assets are frozen, they cannot travel, and there is also an arms embargo that is put. So this is about how China is coming to the defense of terrorists again and again at the United Nations Security Council. Let's now move on and take a look at China's double standards. I'm quoting here from the BRICS declaration, the 14th BRICS Summit Beijing declaration. It was put out on the 23rd of June this year, and there are 19 references to combating terrorism in it. It says that we call for expeditious finalization and adoption of CCIT within the UN framework. What is CCIT? It is the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, mooted as a draft document by India in 1996, hasn't seen the light of day even after 30 years. We reaffirm sole authority of the UNSC for imposing sanctions. So UNSC is the sole authority for imposing sanctions. That particular BRICS summit said. Look at the irony here. Beijing hosted it. This is the Beijing declaration, and Beijing is not sticking to this word. We call for further strengthening of working methods of UNSC committees to ensure the effectiveness and their transparency. Let's move on to the next plate, please. Responsiveness and transparency while avoiding politicization of proceedings, including listing proposals. So this has been said in as many words by China in the BRICS declaration. We are committed to combating terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Let's move on to the next plate, because this statement says, and it condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, including cross-border movement of terrorists, terrorism financing networks and safe havens. So this was a text put out under the Chinese presidency of BRICS in June this year, and look at how China is not complying with that very document. Now, India has slammed the practice of placing holds. It said that credibility of sanctions regime is at an all-time low. Practice of placing holds and blocks on listing requests without giving any justification must end. This is what Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj said a day before China put the technical hold on the US and India proposal for listing Abdul Rauf Azhar as a global terrorist by the UNSC. Effective functioning of sanctions committee requires them to become more transparent, accountable and objective. This is another point that the Indian ambassador to the UN made. Most regrettable that genuine and evidence-based listing proposals pertaining to some of the most notorious terrorists in the world are being placed on hold. So India made its anger known on what's been happening at the UNSC as far as its sanctions regime is concerned. Double standards and continuing politicization have rendered credibility of the sanctions regime at an all-time low. So essentially, this puts into perspective what we are seeing as far as China's stand in the UNSC on various terrorists are concerned. Let's get more perspective on this. Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation, joins us. Mr. Bansal, do the developments at the UNSC once again show the strategic alliance between Pakistan and China?
See, there is no doubt the manner in which this particular dreaded terrorist who was involved in many proven acts of terrorism, including the hijacking of IC-814, where he was involved in planning that particular incident, and many other acts of terrorism, including Pathankot attack, Parliament attack, etc. Blocking such a terrorist from being declared a global terrorist under 1267 by putting it on technical hold clearly indicates that China has a vested agenda. And as far as this particular issue is concerned, there can be no other vested agenda but to help their long-term ally, Pakistan, to come out of this precarious situation, because all other 14 countries of the committee were actually supporting, designating this gentleman, Asghar, as a global terrorist. So this very clearly shows that the strands of Sino-Pak relationship really run deep, and China is willing to even cross that Rubicon that is trying to defend the indefensible, that is these global terrorists. which China itself has been criticizing in BRICS summit that we will not do anything, we will not do anything. But again, time and again, China puts declaration of these dreaded terrorists as global terrorists on technical hold, as was seen in the case of Makki in June, and now in this particular case just now. So this shows that China is pursuing this policy primarily to help Pakistan.
Yes, and would you say that this also signals that ties have nosedived between India and China, as well as the China and the United States? This is yet another signal of the same, isn't it?
There is no doubt that Sino-Indian relations, which at one stage seemed on the upswing, have actually hit the nadir ever since we had the conflict in Galwan Valley. And this again continues to show that China is not showing any consideration to Indian sensitivities on such crucial issues like this. As regards US is concerned, US-China relations in any case after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan have probably hit the nadir in recent times. And I think since this particular proposal was also supported by the US, maybe China is trying to hit two birds with one stone, that is to support its ally Pakistan, but also at the same time also giving signals to US and India that he is not going to support us. So I think this is regrettable. The Chinese should reconsider, because the terrorism is nobody's ally, and they will also be hit by the same terrorists who they are trying to defend at this point.
Mr. Bansal, under the BRICS declaration that I read out some excerpts of to the viewers, we see the text that is written and which says that we call for further strengthening of the working methods of UNSC committees to ensure their effectiveness, responsiveness and transparency while avoiding politicization of proceedings, including listing proposals. Is this empty rhetoric by China? Because this is what it's exactly not doing.
It's a double speak actually, as you can see. That they made a statement at a different forum, in a different tenor, and now they are actually acting completely at variance with what they had stated during the BRICS summit. One would have hoped that China would have shown maturity, but at this point of time, I think China is completely rattled. They are upset with what has happened in Taiwan. Xi Jinping has to get himself re-elected, and I think the decisions that they are taking are extremely, extremely shameful. I think defending a global terrorist cannot be condoned by any civilized nation, and is not expected certainly from a country which holds a seat in the UN Security Council as a permanent member and a veto-wielding member. I think it is extremely regrettable, and I think this very clearly exposes China to the world. China, which now is trying to claim a global leadership, is very, very badly exposed. That Chinese have no moral values. They are willing to support even terrorists in case its support meets their narrow national aims at that point of time. And I think the support for China, which has always been low as far as the international community is concerned, will further lower with this sort of actions that China is indulging in.
Yes, we've heard from Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, India's permanent representative to the UN, just a day before India and the US jointly moved the proposal for the listing as a global terrorist of Abdul Rauf Azhar, and she said that the sanctions regime has hit an all-time low thanks to double standards and politicization. Do you think that the international community will need to make do with this, or does the call for UN reforms by the developing countries, including India, by the G4, by other groupings, etc., also include this? And practically, is there any hope that things are going to change going forward?
See, there is no doubt that UN needs to reform. UN does not represent the global committee of nations today. It actually reflects the realities of post-World War II. Balance of power in the world, but more significantly, I think its functioning, its manner of functioning, all need to reform, because everything is being politicized, even on an issue like which should be actually assessed by members purely on objective basis, purely on the basis of evidence presented. The countries are voting according to their political interests, and this is extremely regrettable for an organization like United Nations, which has been created to prevent such catastrophic events or war to bring usher in global peace. And terrorism is, I think, one of the biggest threats that the global community faces today. And regrettably, as I said, even voting on such crucial issues is taking along political beliefs and political ideologies rather than on evidence-based facts that have been presented before the committee.
Mr. Bansal, we've also heard from Ambassador Kamboj that India will be hosting a special meeting of the UNSC Counter-Terrorism Committee in Delhi and Mumbai on the 28th and 29th of October in order to discuss use of technology like drones or cyber crimes, etc. by terrorists. Do you think that this would also be an opportune moment for India to make its case for UN reforms and for changing the way the Sanctions Committee has been functioning?
There is no doubt that we need to do that, and in fact we should go ahead and highlight it to the international community. I think many countries of the globe are still not aware of how viciously this country has been behaving, that's been putting on technical hold terrorists with proven cases of terrorism. And in fact, because the global community, most of the countries do realize that today terrorism has no national boundaries. A terrorist which is indulging in acts of terrorism in one part of the world could be indulging in acts of terrorism in next part of the world. So it threatens them also. I think India would do well at least to make a very strong case for reform as far as the process of branding terrorists as global terrorists are concerned.
Okay. Now, having said that, do you think that in front of the international community, China is seen as a country that is backing Pakistan-based terrorists? And do you think that there could well be a repeat of what we saw in 2019 when there was a lot of international pressure put on China and China had to finally relent on its stand which protected Maulana Masood Azhar, the Jaish-e-Mohammed founder? So do you think a repeat of that is likely to happen, China's position further being undermined in the eyes of the international community and more international pressure coming to bear on China to change its stand?
I have no doubts that with the passage of time, China will eventually relent, and these two individuals who are dreaded terrorists, and there is significant amount of evidence available against the acts of terror in which they have been involved, China will eventually accept and support the process. But it will delay it, and that's been the Chinese proposition, because what they have done is they have not opposed it. They have put it on technical hold, asking for some more information, something. And this is the typical bureaucratic response to something where you don't want a process to go ahead. So this fact is this has been the Chinese tactics, and this needs to be exposed. The international community must be told how Masood Azhar's designation as a global terrorist itself was delayed by China by so much a period. Eventually they agreed. But this whole process of technical holds indicate that they wanted to delay it. And I think this factor needs to be exposed, that what they are doing today against proven terrorists is just delay the process. I think eventually they'll come around, because the evidence is so foolproof that it will be very difficult for them to actually support these so-called terrorists. And I think global community is seeing through this. So it is important that India pursues a campaign, a global campaign, to expose this Chinese duplicity, making some statements in BRICS summit and acting absolutely in a different manner when it comes to designating terrorists as global terrorists. So I think this needs to be exposed so that greater pressure is built upon China, so that China actually comes online faster than the time that they took in the case of Masood Azhar.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us, Alok Bansal, with your views on what China has done at the UNSC once again. Let's move on now. Ukraine and Russia blame each other for new strikes on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine's Interior Minister Denis Monastrsky said that Ukraine had to be ready for any scenario at the Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that has been hit by shelling, including evacuating people from the area. Ukraine and Russia installed local officials blamed each other for a new volley of shelling on Thursday at the nuclear power plant, Europe's biggest, which lies in southern Ukraine.
Існують плани по тому, щоб there are plans that consider every possible development of the situation, including discharge of the radiation. That's why our plans include the evacuation from nearby settlements. I want to remind that this is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It has 6 energy blocks. Of course, it is difficult to even imagine the scale of the tragedy which could come into effect if Russians continue their actions there.
Масштаб трагедії, який може відбутися в разі
Accusing Russia of strikes around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Ukrainian President Zelensky called the strikes as one of the greatest crimes. He also said only the complete withdrawal of Russians would ensure the restoration of nuclear security for the whole of Europe.
Що відбувається зараз навколо
What is going on now around Zaporizhzhia NPP is one of the greatest crimes of the terrorist state. Today, new strikes in close proximity to the NPP objects have been recorded. Russia has again hit the bottom in the world history of terrorism. No one else has used a nuclear power plant so obviously to threaten the whole world and set some conditions. And absolutely everyone in the world must react immediately to kick the occupiers out of Zaporizhzhia NPP. It is a global interest rather than just a Ukrainian need. We are emphasizing on this at all levels, from the UN Security Council to contacts between states. Only the complete withdrawal of Russians from the territory of the NPP and restoration of full control of Ukraine over the situation around the plant guarantee the restoration of nuclear security for whole Europe.
гарантують відновлення атомної безпеки для всієї Європи.
Meanwhile, UN Chief Antonio Guterres has also voiced concern over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant strikes, calling for demilitarization of the area around Europe's biggest nuclear power plant. He urged the withdrawal of military personnel and equipment and for no more forces or equipment to be deployed. He called for Russia and Ukraine not to target the facilities or the surrounding area. The UN has also urged for immediate access to experts' team to Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia power plant. As the UN chief Antonio Guterres calls for an end of military activity around the Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power complex, IAEA chief briefed the 15-member Security Council about the situation. Grossi said that he was ready to lead an IAEA mission to Zaporizhzhia and called on Russia and Ukraine to cooperate so the inspectors could travel as soon as possible.
The IAEA has been ready to perform such a mission since June, when we were ready to go. But unfortunately, due to political factors and other considerations, it was not possible. We've seen what has happened over the past 2 months. We cannot allow such factors to delay us any longer. I reiterate that the military actions that have even the smallest potential to jeopardize nuclear safety or nuclear security at such a nuclear installation must stop immediately. These actions would lead us to serious consequences. The IAEA is ready to help avert such an escalation of the crisis.
India's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, addressed the UNSC meeting on Thursday. Speaking at the UNSC briefing, she said that India is carefully following the developments regarding the safety and security of Ukraine. She also lauded the efforts made by the International Atomic Energy Agency in this regard.
We continue to carefully follow developments regarding the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear power reactors and facilities. India attaches high importance to ensuring the safety and security of these facilities. We also accord high priority to the discharge by the International Atomic Energy Agency of its safeguards and monitoring activities in accordance with its statute in an effective, non-discriminatory and efficient manner. And we value the efforts of the agency in this regard.
Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj further said that ever since the conflict in Ukraine has started, India has consistently called for an end to the violence and has asked both the nations to choose the path of diplomacy and dialogue.
India continues to remain concerned over the situation in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the conflict, India has consistently called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and an end to violence. We've called upon both sides to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. We support all diplomatic efforts to end the conflict.
Moving on to national prime. A migrant labourer has been shot dead by terrorists in Bandipora in Jammu and Kashmir. The labourer succumbed to his injuries following the attack. As per the police, the deceased labourer was identified as Muhammad Amrez, the son of Muhammad Jalil, and a resident of Bihar's Madhepura district. International Youth Day is being celebrated today to acknowledge and amplify the importance of youth participation in current affairs. This year's theme is Intergenerational Solidarity, creating a world for all ages to combat ageism and build bridges between generations. From the wisdom of youth to the energy and idealism of the elderly, we must welcome and leverage the gifts people of all ages bring and ensure no one is left behind. The world's problems are too vast for entire generations to be absent from helping address them. Thus, young people's efforts and contributions, big and small, towards righting the world's wrongs and pulling others along with them is being celebrated. Today's youth are tomorrow's leaders who know that nothing will change if they stand by. Change only happens when they stand up. Union Minister for Youth Affairs and Sports Anurag Singh Thakur addressed the Yuva Samvad India at the Rate 2047 event on the occasion of International Youth Day. Union Minister for Education Dharmendra Pradhan also attended the event. Addressing the event, Union Minister Anurag Thakur called on the youth of the nation to know and understand the rich culture of India.
हमें अपनी जड़ों पर गर्व होना चाहिए। हमें अपने जो समृद्ध और संपन्न इतिहास है उस पर भी गर्व होना चाहिए, समृद्ध संस्कृति पर गर्व होना चाहिए। और हम जो वेस्टर्न कल्चर की बात करते हैं उनके जो अच्छा होगा वो उसको अपनाने में कोई हर्ज नहीं है, लेकिन हम अपने समृद्ध जो हमारा संस्कृति रही उसको जानने का, उसको समझने का बहुत प्रयास करना चाहिए, उस पर गर्व भी होना चाहिए।
And now a look at the latest developments related to the observance of Har Ghar Tiranga campaign. As a part of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav on the completion of 75 years of independence, the Kalaburgi fort of Karnataka was decorated with tricolour lights. The whole atmosphere was filled with patriotism. Have a look. JNK's Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha flagged off the Tiranga rally under the Har Ghar Tiranga campaign at Dal Lake. Nationalistic spirit was seen on the occasion. The Tiranga rally was organised by the Department of Youth Services and Sports. Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha flagged off the Har Ghar Tiranga campaign from Dal Lake in Kashmir.
Smile. Smile.
Houseboats on the Dal Lake marking the Har Ghar Tiranga Abhiyan. It starts on the 13th of August till the 15th of August, which is India's 76th Independence Day, the day India completes 75 years of its independence. In Avantipura area of Pulwama district of Jammu and Kashmir, a tricolour rally was taken out by the 130th Battalion of CRPF on National Highway to showcase the region's solidarity under the Har Ghar Tiranga campaign. To mark the Har Ghar Tiranga Abhiyan, Air Force officers unfold the Tiranga at an altitude of 15,000 feet above sea level. DRDO released the video of unfurling of the tricolour in the sky. The tricolour was unfurled through skydiving at an altitude of 15,000 feet above the ground in Taj Nagri, Agra. Midday Prime, it's now time for news and updates from the world of business. The Nasdaq retreated to close lower on Thursday despite fresh evidence of cooling inflation. On the realization, the Federal Reserve still needs to aggressively boost interest rates to fully tame rising consumer prices, whereas the drop in PPI raised bets in futures markets that the Fed would hike rates by 50 basis points in September instead of 75 basis points as was expected earlier in the week.
The market took the expectations from 75 basis points at the September meeting down to 50 basis points. We think that's probably a fairly reasonable assumption. The Federal Reserve is continuing to talk, however, quite hawkishly about inflation, and as a result, we expect to see a longer duration of interest rate hikes and probably a lot tighter than most people are going to be comfortable with. Again, we think this inflation number is going to come down, but slowly, and probably end up slowing down corporate earnings growth quite a bit.
The S&P 500 lost 0.071%, while the Nasdaq Composite lost 0.5%. 0.58%, whereas the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.08%. Pharmaceutical industry giant Johnson & Johnson has decided to end the sale of talc-based baby powder globally in 2023. The decision has come more than 2 years after it ended US sales of the product following legal battles over the talc's safety. The company faces about 38,000 lawsuits from consumers and their survivors claiming its talc products caused cancer due to contamination with asbestos, a known carcinogen. However, J&J has denied the allegations, saying decades of scientific testing and regulatory approvals have shown its talc to be safe and asbestos-free. South Korea's President Yoon Suk Yeol granted a pardon for Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman J.Y. Lee so that he could help the country overcome a national economic crisis. The pardon is largely symbolic, with Lee already out on parole after serving 18 months in jail for bribery relating to his time leading the world's biggest smartphone and memory chip maker. However, the pardon should mean Lee will be able to carry out business activities more freely and could herald some big moves from Samsung. After the announcement on Friday, Lee vowed to work hard for the national economy. Lotte Group Chairman Shane Dongbin was also pardoned. A look at some more news from around the world and World Prime. Latvia and Estonia withdrew from a cooperation group between China and over a dozen Central and Eastern European countries on Thursday, following in the footsteps of Baltic neighbour Lithuania, which withdrew last year. In a statement, Latvia and Estonia Foreign Ministry said, "We will continue to strive for constructive and pragmatic relations with China, both bilaterally as well as through EU-China cooperation based on mutual benefit, respect for international law, human rights and the international rules-based order." Relations between Lithuania and China worsened after the former allowed Taiwan to open a de facto embassy late last year. Bulgaria, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Greece, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovakia and Slovenia are among the countries that remain in the cooperation format. The move comes amid Western criticism towards China over escalating military pressure on democratically ruled Taiwan, which China claims as its own territory, and Beijing's strengthening of ties with Russia during the invasion of Ukraine. The US State Department has said that it respects and supports Estonia and Latvia's sovereign decision to no longer participate in the 16+1 initiative. In a statement, it said that it will continue to closely support their efforts to make the Baltics a more resilient and prosperous region. Estonia and Latvia are important and valued NATO allies and key US partners across a number of issues, including through a strong defense ties, a strong economic ties, as well as promotion of democracy and human rights. Beyond our commitments to these same values, our free democratic countries produce prosperity that helps both of our economies thrive. So US has come out in support of Estonia and Latvia's decision to withdraw from the group. UK Prime Ministerial contenders Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss clashed on tax cuts and economy. Rishi Sunak said on Thursday his rival Liz Truss's economic plans could push millions of the UK's most vulnerable people into real destitution. Truss has also warned that raising taxes would likely lead to a recession and promised to reverse some tax rises.
If you support a plan that Liz is suggesting, which says she doesn't believe in doing that, doesn't believe in providing direct financial support to those groups of people, and that's what she said, because she thinks her tax cut is going to help them, which it is not, we are going to, as a Conservative government, leave millions of incredibly vulnerable people at the risk of real destitution. Now, I think that is a moral failure.
But those tax changes will cost £30 billion. That is affordable within our current budget. We'll still be able to pay debt down after 3 years. But I'm afraid to say the plans of raising taxes are likely to lead to a recession, and with a recession it'll be harder to pay the debt down.
So Rishi Sunak saying he won't lead the country down the garden path, whereas Liz Truss saying that there is a need for tax cuts. Now some weather-related stories. Climate change is the greatest existential threat to society, driving wildfires, flooding and species extinctions. Wildfire has raged for a third day in southwestern France on Thursday, ravaging forests and forcing 10,000 people to evacuate their homes. With no let-up in scorching temperatures likely before the weekend, firefighters backed by water-bombing aircraft battled on many fronts, saying the massive fire could change direction at any moment. Houston's firefighters prepared for another day of wildfires on Thursday in the Gironde region of southwestern France. The blazes have destroyed homes and forced the evacuation of some 10,000 residents, raising about 6,200 hectares of land. In central Portugal, harsh wildfires continue to rage, destroying thousands of hectares of land. Locals have been struggling to protect their livelihoods. Meanwhile, over 1,500 firefighters deployed to douse the fire in the central Cohilva region fought the blaze even on the sixth day. The fire has burnt 10,500 hectares, including parts of the Serra da Estrela National Park. Extreme heat wave has been baking parts of Europe, especially Spain and France. The European Space Agency said that on Thursday that various districts across Portugal were on red alert for extreme fire risk. The source of the river Thames has dried up further downstream than ever before, as England looks set to enter a drought that some experts say the country is unprepared for. According to Britain's Met Office, this July was the driest for England since 1935, with average rainfall at 23.1 millimeters, just 35% of the average for the month. The River Thames stretches 215 miles across southern England from Gloucestershire in the west through the heart of London before entering the area, the sea in fact, at Essex to the east. The weather is becoming more extreme as longer periods of drought are alternated with heavy rainfall in short periods of time. In the dry periods, the cities feel hot and muggy. In order to be more resistant to the heat in the future, Delft University of Technology has set up the Green Village in Netherlands. Different ways to keep houses cool are tested there. Green walls and facades, white rooftops and the installation of special glass which blocks UV radiation at the touch of a button can help with this. Residents work for climate project adaptation at Delft University of Technology. Netherlands is getting warmer day by day. In Asia, the heaviest rain in Seoul in 115 years has spurred the South Korean capital to revive a $1.15 billion plan to improve drainage after floods exposed how even the affluent Gangnam district is vulnerable to climate change-driven extreme weather. The underground tunnels were originally proposed in 2011 after heavy rains and landslides killed 16 people, many of them in Gangnam. But the plan was also put on hold amid decreased precipitation and budget issues in the following years. This week's torrential rain killed at least 11 people across the northern part of the country as of Thursday and knocked out power, caused landslides and flooded roads and subways. In the western U.S. state of California that is already facing the brunt of flash floods, Governor Gavin Newsom unveiled a new water strategy that plans for a future with 10% less water due to acidification. The new water strategy shifts the emphasis from conservation to capturing more water that otherwise flows out to sea. The plan announced on Thursday calls for creating storage for 4 million acre-feet of water and recycling or reusing 8 lakh acre-feet per year by 2030, in addition to more storm water capture and desalination projects. Climate change has contributed to more severe drought, but has also set the stage for more intense flooding when rain does fall, as was demonstrated last week in California's Death Valley, one of the hottest, driest parts of the U.S. And now, time for all the sports action in Sports Prime. Well, Rahul has received the green signal from BCCI's medical team clearing his participation in the forthcoming 3 ODI tour of Zimbabwe. Shikhar Dhawan, originally named captain for the short tour, will serve as the deputy to the returning Rahul. Rahul, who has not played international cricket since February this year, has been laid low by a series of injuries and health concerns. Right after the IPL, he was scheduled to captain India in the home T20 internationals against South Africa, but missed out owing to a groin injury. The spell on the sidelines was extended after it was revealed that the 30-year-old would require surgery. Consequently, Rahul missed the tour of England and Ireland. All the 3 ODIs of India's tour will be held at the Harare Sports Club, with the series kicking off on the 18th of August. The World Cup in Qatar will kick off a day earlier than is scheduled. Governing body FIFA said this on Thursday after its ruling bureau agreed unanimously to hold the opening ceremony and the host nation's first match on Sunday, the 20th of November. The original plan was for the opening ceremony to be held before Qatar's game on 21st November against Ecuador, which would have created the unusual situation of 2 matches, Senegal versus Netherlands and England versus Iran, being held before the ceremony. Normally, the ceremony is conducted before the kickoff of the first game of the tournament. FIFA said that the decision followed an assessment of the competition and operational implications, as well as a thorough consultation process and an agreement with key stakeholders and the host country. At the ongoing Montreal Masters, Nick Kyrgios defeated fellow Australian player Alex de Minaur 6-2, 6-3 to enter the quarterfinals of the ATP Montreal Masters. The winner of last week's Washington 500 series title suffered his only recent loss to Novak Djokovic in the Wimbledon final. This recent win now means that he will be in the top 30 next week, which will also assure him a seeding at the US Open, which starts on the 29th of August. Nick Kyrgios has now won 15 of his last 16 singles matches and will next face 8th-seeded Hubert Hurkacz. As India celebrates 75 years of its independence, the Indian men's hockey team, post their victorious return from Commonwealth Games 2022, visited the National War Memorial in New Delhi on Thursday. The 11-member team showed their deep interest in visiting this monument of great national importance, which symbolizes the long tradition of unflinching loyalty, valor and sacrifice in the line of duty. With the inquisitiveness of knowing and learning about the glorious history of the country, the team took a tour around the monument and visited the Veerta Chakra, that is the circle of bravery, Tyag Chakra, that is the circle of sacrifice, Param Yodha Sthal, etc. Meanwhile, coming over the walls of Tyag Chakra, some of the team members said, "It is really a proud moment for us to see more than 26,000 names of martyrs etched here, and without missing the chance, we would like to offer a homage to the martyrs of Kargil War." And now it's time for our next segment, Live Prime, where we bring you stories from the world of art, culture, cinema, fashion, science and innovation. Stories that are bringing smiles, stories that are changing lives. The 13th edition of the Indian Film Festival of Melbourne has begun this afternoon, and the largest annual celebration of Indian cinema outside of India showcases some of the most diverse, inclusive, groundbreaking films and filmmakers, all whilst encapsulating the best of Indian cinema from the Indian subcontinent. Over 100 films from a range of genres, themes and voices for audiences to enjoy both in person and online will be screened at the festival. A series of exciting events has also been curated for the audiences to immerse themselves into the world of cinematic brilliance. And with that, we come to the close of this edition of Midday Prime. Thanks for watching.